Hello, friends. We are back with another edition of Jesuit Lunch Hour. As always, we are powered by beajesuit.org. I'm Father Michael Rospin, and I am privileged yet again to welcome a great Jesuit to the show, Mr. Damian Torres-Botello. Welcome, Damian, to Jesuit Lunch Hour.
Hello. How are you doing?
Bringing the enthusiasm already.
Yes.
Damian, I always like to ask guys to share a bit about their background as we get going. So can you tell us a bit about your bio?
Yeah. So I was born and raised in in Kansas City, Missouri, and lived there most of my life. I have my background, I think, professionally maybe is theater. So I went to college at a very small college in Leavenworth, Kansas, called St. Mary College, and majored in theater. And then me and a friend of mine started a theater company and had a theater company for 5 years that focused on social justice issues. Did that for a good little while, with some odd jobs here and there because you have to pay the bills when you're a theater artist because it doesn't really pay much. Then I moved to Chicago to what I thought was going to be an advancing of my career in the theater, but instead I met the Jesuits, and it derailed everything in a good way. So I moved to Chicago, was an event planner there for about 3 years, met the Society of Jesus, discerned and entered. I'm a late vocation, I guess I would say, entered in my mid-30s. So I guess that's proof that like your life is never set, it is kind of, what is that adage that if you, when you make a plan, like God will like laugh at you or something and make it different or something. I don't know. That's what it felt like. I had a plan. I had a good plan. And then, well, here I am with a totally different plan.
Yeah, that's great. And you would have joined the Jesuits in the Midwest, and you would have done the novitiate, the first stage of training in the Twin Cities, right?
That's right. Yeah, I was asked if I wanted to, because I'm from Kansas City, and so that's in a very different province than the Midwest province. So I was asked if I wanted to discern into what is now the Southern Central Province. And it was really between, do I want to be hot? Because their novitiate is in Grand Coteau, Louisiana. So do I want to be hot and humid, or do I want to be cold? And I prefer the cold. So
cold weather, but warm people here in the Midwest.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. And Damian, I can't help but notice that your shirt looks somewhat liturgically appropriate for this season. Was this intentional?
I want to say that, yes. I woke up feeling very liturgically intentional, but it was the next one in line.
But you have been intentional in another way.
Yes.
Liturgical season. Why don't you share a bit about this new project that you have going on right now?
Yes. So, Brother Matt Wooters, who I think you've had as a guest before, he is in theology in Berkeley, California, in Berkeley. When I met in Boston College. And he had this idea of starting a podcast called Along the Way, which would be an Advent podcast. So Matt and I have a history. I think a couple of years ago, maybe we did an Instagram kind of, I don't know what, I think it was leading up to St. Ignatius Day in July, but we had a thing that we called 31 Minutes for Peace. So that was our first venture into some kind of like accompanying people in prayer, which for Matt and I, we are good friends, and maybe that's influencing each of us, but we really believe in prayer and really trying to find a way that prayer can be, I don't know, people who I think of like just the everyday person who just is trying to find time to pray and just can't, maybe doesn't know all that much about prayer, but has an idea of it. I mean, who knows? It's not like guys that I live with who are studying theology. It's not for them. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, that's the audience is for the everyday person. And that's the kind of audience that Matt and I seem to want to attract. So this podcast Along the Way is another way that we thought this could be an entryway into prayer, especially during Advent, because Advent is one of my favorite times of year. I like the idea of, well, I guess it's not an idea, but I like waiting, the sense of waiting. It's very Catholic to be waiting. And so here we are in Advent, waiting for Christ, which is really funny to me because kind of like Lent, we already know how the story is going to end, but yet we still prepare ourselves for this ultimate moment. And there's just something exciting in that. And what a good time to invite people into prayer, even if they just pray for this little bit amount of time. That's more than maybe what they had intended to do, or maybe wanted to do, or maybe that's all they desired to do. Who knows? But this podcast is this little meditation. It starts with kind of a banter back and forth with Matt and I. I'm just talking about something that's based on a theme. And then we kind of introduce little tidbits of themes. So one of them was about distractions, talking about distractions, and playing off of the fact that Matt is very extroverted and I tend to be very introverted and anxious. So like, we're both distracted in our own unique ways. So how do we stay focused in prayer? And so offering some kind of strategies that we do on our own, but then inviting people into a meditation or just a centering as the prayer. And it's less than 15 minutes. And that's kind of the frame of the podcast.
Yeah. And you do it twice a week, right? So you have a podcast over the weekend that is on the Sunday
scripture and it's released on Saturday. But you can listen to it anytime, obviously. And then we do a midweek check-in just to see how you're doing. And that is released on Wednesday, Thursday. And so the Sunday, the weekend podcast is also shared through AMDG, the larger Jesuit podcast that they have. I don't know how to describe that, but it's on their platform. And then we have our own platform as well that also includes this midweek check-in that AMDG doesn't publish, but we include. So you can kind of try and keep you accountable. Also to add another moment of prayer, even if that's the only time you pray. So now you've had 2 surprising moments of prayer. It's like we're trying to trick you. And that was one of the comments. Like, I think we got an email from someone who said that they turned the podcast on and they were doing something in the kitchen. And suddenly they realized that they had stopped and were praying, and they had that was not what they were intending to do, but we got them. We got you. I don't know.
Great. And what has the response been like thus far?
It's been so good. I have been so surprised. We have so many great comments of people who have really thanked us for this moment, for learning some lessons. I think we've had almost, or maybe we are at 4,000 listeners right now. I think a lot of that too was thank you to James Martin, who helped give us a little bit of a push there. And then Patrick Ortuma, who's from On Being, will be promoting it for this weekend. So we have some people who are excited about this little project to get the word out. I think really what it says to me is that people are hungry for something larger than themselves, and we are just in a random weird time that is very unfortunate, very inconvenient. Both sad and frustrating. And I think people are trying to make best with what they can. But yet in that, I think underneath all that, there's something there desiring to place their stress into something else. And for me, that would be into God's hands. And so whether that's the language that the listeners use, I don't know. But that's what we're inviting. And I think that they are responding to that, because I think there is that. I mean, I don't know how someone who doesn't have this kind of belief can go forward.
I've had a similar thought during this time and it's not out of a sense of, judgment or anything like that. It's just like, I don't know how people do it without faith. I just don't know.
I mean, I know that there have been days that I have not prayed, and my day just gets discombobulated and is just, and then when I sit down at the end of the day to look back, why is my day so messy? And then I'm like, oh, well, that's because I usually start my day in prayer, and I just didn't. And so somehow for me, it correlates into, not to say that my day is always joyful and happy and that there's no struggle or stress, but the way in which I have framed my day and the way in which I have invited God into my day makes a difference when I don't do that. I think the noticing happens more when I'm not doing something than when I am doing something. So I think that's a good, for me at least, it's a good reminder when I'm missing something. It's because I didn't do the thing that I'm wanting to do the most.
Yeah. And okay, so you have a podcast focused on Advent along the way.
Yes.
How do you make sense of Advent at this current moment? You're talking about waiting, and I think that's a very common experience during this pandemic. We're waiting for, a vaccine to be available to people and so forth. And then also this is a time when, many people have not been able to go to church as they normally would. So kind of, how do you see this moment of Advent during the particular pandemic? And then also, how do you see your podcast as a tool for ministry at this time?
Yeah. So to the first part, I would think that, so this waiting in Advent is intentional waiting. I would say that this pandemic kind of waiting was by no one's choice. And probably was not intentional. It maybe for some might have moved into some kind of intentionality, but that was not, we were all forced into that intentionality. I think there's something about being intentional and waiting, because that at the end of this waiting is something larger. And so I think that during this time, it's like, how are you arranging your life during this time of waiting for a vaccine? And can it be organized or oriented in a way that then offers glory to the gift of life? I don't know if that makes any sense. This is kind of fresh all of a sudden. But watching the news and seeing the numbers of how many have died, and I think it was something like yesterday was more than 9/11 that have died from COVID. So how can we then be reminded of the gift of life, which is given to us at the time of Christmas through an incarnation? I think that putting yourself into an organized waiting, but maybe not organized, into, again, intentional waiting, a life that is unintentional because you're forced to do it, I think invites you to reflect on the importance of what's happening in your life right now. And also we're looking forward, so now we have this vaccine. So offering that as a gift. Yes, it's as a kind of resolution, but it's probably something that we should be thankful for, so we don't make light or take advantage of the moment. I don't know if that makes any sense. But then as far as this as a project, how we see this as a ministry, I'll say this. I think that I was in a class, and there's a woman in the class who was a convert from she was Baptist before she became Catholic, and she spoke about in a conversation, it was a side conversation, about how Catholics don't really talk about God the way maybe Baptists do. I have Protestant friends who talk about Christ all the time so freely, and I'm a little like, oh, what are we doing? So for better or for worse, why Catholics do that, don't do that, I have no idea. But this is a time where we can maybe. And so being able to be explicit about our love for God, for Christ, for the movement of the Holy Spirit, to say it very plainly during Advent, I think makes the spiritual life, makes it normative instead of so separate from everything else. Matt and I talk about our lives and how God is inside of our lives, and I think there is this temptation maybe to make my life and then the spiritual life two different things. And so for ministry, here's a way to try and look at it as being integrated, because they both reflect and influence the other.
Great.
I don't know.
Yeah. No, thanks, Damian. As a way of concluding our conversation, I always like to ask guys, what advice they would give, or if you have a little nugget of wisdom you might offer to someone in discernment, whether that person is thinking about the Jesuits or religious life, or whether that person is discerning anything in his or her life. What advice might you give?
I would say I have two kinds of advice. So before I entered the Society of Jesus, I really didn't know Jesuits. So the vocation person at the time, the vocation director at the time, was always invited me to all these events. I lived in Chicago. Loyola Chicago was right there. So there was a lot of events happening there. There was a lot of other kind of vocation-specific events where there were Jesuits present besides the vocations director. And I think that was probably one of the best things to do, was to go to those events, to get to know Jesuits, because I think it's not just to say, because I think I met you probably randomly at one of those events. And I was like, and it really wasn't about meeting Jesuits per se. I think what it did for me was that it helped me place myself inside the shoes of a Jesuit, and helped me be able to say, so this is what this guy in formation is doing at Loyola Chicago. Can I imagine myself doing that? Going to the novitiate for a discernment retreat allowed me to, yes, pray and deeply discern about a choice, but I also imagined myself living in that space. Can I see myself living here? Can I see myself eating my meals here, or taking walks in the city? And for me, St. Paul, Minnesota is so far north that it felt so far away. So like, how does that feel, being far away from people that I know? So I think all of that is intended for me, was to put myself in other people's shoes, to imagine myself there. So I would say, go to as many events as you can. Imagine yourself in those shoes. Can you see yourself living this life in some way? And I think the second thing would be to ask questions. There might be some things that just don't make sense. I remember being in the novitiate as a candidate in the discernment retreat, and they had this thing, which I know now, but at the time they had this thing on the bulletin board called an ordo, which was like a schedule of like what their day was mapped out to be. Each time was like, you're doing this for this time and whatever. How strange. And I don't think I'm 33 at the time, 34. Like, why? What is this for? That felt very elementary school to me. So even just by looking at random things like that, like asking questions, it all helps gather data for your discernment. And I don't think that any question is silly or stupid. I think if it's something that you're curious about, and you feel this nudge inside you that's kind of like, I don't understand, well, let that be the signal to ask a question, because that might help you along the way.
Along the way.
I did not mean to do that.
You can listen to, where can they listen to the podcast?
Yeah, so Along the Way can be heard anywhere where podcasts can be found. So you can find it on SoundCloud, you can find it on Spotify and iTunes, Stitcher. It's all there.
Fantastic. Damian Torres-Botello, it's been great to have you on Jesuit Lunch Hour, powered by beajesuit.org.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
This will be the last episode of Jesuit Lunch Hour of 2020. I haven't made a decision yet about 2021, so if it should come back, just let me know. Thanks again, Damian, and happy Advent and Merry Christmas to all our viewers.